Hey everyone, in today's video I'm going to be doing a side-by-side comparison of the Geissele SSA-E and the Larue MBT-2S. In my last video I went over some single stage offerings that I have, one of them being the Geissele SSP, the Larue MBT-1S, and then also the Sons of Liberty Gunworks Liberty Fighting Trigger. So real quickly, I just want to discuss the differences between a single stage trigger and a two-stage trigger. Single stage trigger has one even consistent pull weight throughout the trigger pull. There should not be much, if any, take up that you have to work through. And they said it's supposed to be faster. It's said to be faster. And also it should surprise you, so with air quotes, when the trigger breaks. Whereas a two-stage trigger, it can lend itself to better accuracy due to being able to kind of slowly work your way through the trigger, because in the first stage you have take up that you have to take up with your trigger finger, and then you're going to hit a wall, and then what releases the hammer and allows it to fire is once you pull through that wall. So where a single stage has one consistent weight and one consistent pull, a two-stage trigger, there is a small bit of weight in the first stage getting the take up out of the trigger, and then another smaller pull weight as you break the second shot. And again, that one, it's said to be a better one chosen for defense, because you don't want it to you don't want to be surprised like you will with a single stage trigger. Last video I stated that I have a preference for single stage triggers in my defense guns. I don't want to mess with pulling through, taking creep out of something, and while that works fine for, say, striker fire guns like a Glock, it is pretty easy to work your way through the take up and then you hit a very firm wall. To me, with the two-stage triggers on ARs, that once you get through that first stage, that second stage is much lighter. So when you go to fully commit to pulling the trigger, it is a lot lighter than you would with just a single stage. You know, it's really comes down to preference. Some guys prefer one, some guys prefer the other. The Geissele SSA-E and Larue MBT-2S are probably the two triggers that I see most hotly debated on the internet forums and the social media groups. If I have my history right, the MBT-2S was Larue's answer to the SSA-E. They are a bit different between the two of them, which I will go over in this video. I would say the biggest difference between the two is the price. The Larue MBT-2S costs about $100. Back when I bought this one, I want to say they were only running about $80. Whereas the Geissele SSA-E will run you, the typical price is $240. Same price that you would get for the SSA-E. I'm sorry, SSA. Some people will say that the Larue trigger is really more comparable to the SSA versus the SSA-E, but either way, you'd be paying the same amount of price for it. So we're going to discuss those points here. I think it's a fair comparison. And then also, lastly, I don't have an SSA to compare it to, SSA trigger to compare it to. The next difference that I'm going to talk about is going to be the feel of the trigger underneath your finger. As you can see here, the Larue has a much wider face to it than a standard trigger. You could almost say it's squared off a bit. When you put your finger on it, you can definitely feel a lot more positive engagement on it. Some people take that as a pro, and some people don't really care for it so much. Where in comparison to Geissele, the trigger face is a little bit thinner. It's not quite as squared feeling as the Larue, but it is a different feel, or I should say more so that the Larue has a much different feel than the Geissele does, or any other trigger. The Geissele feels a bit more comparative to your standard mil-spec triggers as far as how it feels underneath your hand. You can always tell a Larue trigger typically by the face, or I should say this milling right here. If the camera will focus. This area right here, you can see there's a little bit of pocket that's milled out of it. That's pretty exclusive to Larue. And then of course, most people know that any Geissele trigger does have the old Geissele G on the side of it. Next points I want to discuss is the travel for the trigger. As I mentioned, two-stage triggers, you have take up before you end up hitting a wall. As you can see here, the trigger with the hammer cocked in its natural position sits here, and there is that take up of the first stage. Once you get to that wall, you pull through and brakes. Reset. Very tactile. Again, first stage, second stage. One more time. Very audible and tactile reset. First stage up. Pull through to complete the second. Moving over to the Geissele. First stage. The wall. Brake. Sorry, take up. Not as tactile as the Larue, but definitely discernible. So I know you guys can't feel it through the camera, but you can definitely feel that the Geissele has a much lighter pull to it. There's also a different feel to it once the hammer does release and you're completing the second stage. It's a bit hard to describe, but with the Larue, you get through the first stage. I will say that to me, the untrained specialist in it, the taking up, working through the first stage feels very similar between both triggers, but once you pull the second stage, it's a bit, I'm not going to say mushy, because it's not mushy, but in comparison to the Geissele, there's just a different feel to it. And lastly, I'm going to do a comparison of the pull weights between the two. I'm going to start off with the Larue. I am not going to measure the first stage. I'm just going to measure what both of them break at through the whole cycle. Actually, I'm utilizing my Wheeler Engineering trigger pull scale. I will do it 3 times, just like I do with any other video I've evaluated triggers. So first up, a little under 3.5 pounds. A little under 3.5 pounds. And then one more time. A little bit under 3.5 pounds. So pretty consistent between the 3 different pulls. So it looks like the Larue, which I do want to say, the Larue does come with 2 different springs. One of them is lighter, one of them is heavier. I do have the lighter one in here, as you can see. So pulling through the total weight, we're looking at just a hair under 3.5 pounds. So moving on to the Geissele SSA-E. A little over 2.5 pounds. A little over 2.5 pounds, maybe 2 3/4. And again, about 2 3/4. So you can see the difference between the weight. Let's call it about 3/4 of a pound difference in the pull weight, with the lighter pull going with the Geissele SSA-E. So the pull weight differential between the two of them is pretty minimal. Though when you're only talking about a couple pounds, I guess 3/4 of a pound could be considered a lot. Some people may look at the Geissele SSA-E and say that's just too light. I don't want a trigger that's light. Even 3.5 pounds in the Larue, that's definitely not heavy whatsoever. Especially when you consider that mil spec triggers that come in the majority of guns, which are typically single stage, are pulling anywhere between, on average, 7 to 9 pounds. So very, very, very light. I guess it comes down to what's important to you. So 3 things, obviously trigger feel. I know some guys not only working through the first and second stage, but reset is a big deal to them. I don't really care about reset as long as it's nice and tactile and audible, and you can definitely feel that the trigger's been reset. I know I've seen some guys get really hung up on that, and again, it just comes down to preference and what works for you, so that's okay. Trigger weight, pull weight, so depending on the purpose, how the trigger feels under the pad of your finger, that's going to be something that some guys take into consideration. It's doesn't really make a difference to me, but that's something that you might want to take into consideration. What some might say most importantly will be the price. Big difference between $100 and $240. Now, I did mention in my last video I would never pay $240 for a Geissele trigger. The ones that I have bought in the past were secondhand. This is actually the last one that I bought. The SSP was the only one that I've ever bought brand new. Got that straight from Geissele. That's because it was on sale for $168. Now, granted, after shipping and taxes, that got it up to about $194, if I remember correctly. But you're still talking closer to $50 of savings versus paying normal prices of $240. So, $100, $240. Let's just say $200 because there is sales that go on pretty regularly. They get these down to the $200 price range. So, one's twice as much money as the other. Is it worth it to you? That's something that you have to decide for. Going back to a couple more points about choosing a two-stage trigger over a single stage. Some people say that single stages are best for precision, and some say that a two-stage trigger is better for precision. Now, I typically my school of thought is like I mentioned, I prefer having the single stage for my home defense guns. Anything that I may shoot a little bit more precisely, I do like the two-stage, because getting through that first stage and getting the take-up out of the trigger, that doesn't really count to me as a trigger weight. And then once you get to the second stage, it's quite a bit lighter than what it would be with in comparison to a single stage. They say single stages are faster than two stages. That absolutely does not mean that you can't run a two-stage trigger fast. All right, so that wraps up this video. I know there's many videos out there that cover and compare the differences between these two great iconic triggers. This was just my take on it. So, if that offers some insight to helping you make a decision on which one you want to get, I'm glad I could help. But, as usual, definitely appreciate your viewership. Continue to get new subscribers. It seems to be almost every single day. I'm just, a regular dude who's got a job and kids, and I like to do this for fun. I love firearms, I love accessories, I love gear. So if you like the content that you're seeing, please like the video, hit the subscribe button, sign up for alerts, and whenever I drop a new video, you'll know right away, and please share it. So again, thank you. My review of the Geissele SSA-E and the Larue MBT-2S, not so much a review as it is a comparison. So thank you again.